So we're here to talk about changing the players, not the game, how emerging investors use their money. So obviously, there's a lot of money in venture at the moment. There are a lot of new funds being raised, and a lot of those emerging managers, as in kind of first-time fund managers or people who set up a new fund, are doing things quite differently from the pack that came before. So we're seeing loads of angel and scout programs being set up by the old guard and the new guard. And we're seeing kind of people trying to invest in new types of founders, or the types of founders that have been overlooked thus far, and also kind of bring in different investors into their VC funds. So we're going to be talking about that a bit today. Thea, set us off. Where did kind of unconventional ventures come from, and why is there a need for this kind of thing?
Well, the beginning of unconventional ventures was actually that we could see there was this incredible deal flow of underrepresented founders not getting funding. So it was a notion of we need to capture these opportunities and these great founders that are building groundbreaking innovations. So that was the starting point. And we launched the first fund back in 2019 as a very unconventional setup, because we actually managed to onboard non-accredited investors, or investors that typically you don't see in the venture space. And at that point, we didn't know that that's going to actually evolve into a larger community of investors supporting these founders in the portfolio. So it was a new way of creating an entity that wanted to fuel growth of underrepresented founders with non-traditional investors, basically. Besides us running the fund, was also new in that space.
And how did you actually make that happen? Like, how did you get those untraditional investors in? Because that's not easy, right? There's a reason why people don't go getting people like me investing in their VC fund.
It's what we wanted to do from the beginning, and then as we learned more, we heard more from the traditional investors in the industry. That's not going to work legally. There's no structure to actually have the fund for people who are not professional. But then as time evolved and we got to understand the more sort of bits on how to actually structure it, we found a way. And it was incredible, because in the amount of 3 weeks, we managed to get 60 investors from 10 countries, where 80% of the LPs were women, ranging from the age of 18 to 70, being super angels, VCs, executives, ex-executives, or students who have read about this industry and theoretically could see this is a no-brainer from an investment perspective.
What's your pitch to other funds about why they should do this as well?
Well, it depends a little bit what kind of investor we're talking to. I mean, if they're those that we want to co-invest with, some of them, we can clearly see different categories of investors on how far they are on the maturity of understanding the potential. Some investors really want to invest more diverse, but don't know how. Some investors say that, yes, we should probably do that, but they don't really believe there's an opportunity. And then you have those investors who really want to, but don't have the vehicles or the employees that will attract that kind of deal flow. So for those who are our colleagues in the industry, there's quite a mix of views on that, and also very regional differences. So you have Nordics in Europe is very different from the US. They're already there and see the potential. And then you have the LPs, so the investors that actually invest in the funds. And there I would say there is an emerging group of investors that are looking more toward diversity, and particularly impact and diversity as a part of that, and truly seeing that potential. There's still a long way to go.
Yeah, so Gulnaz, you're obviously doing this. You're part of Atomicos angel program. Do you want to explain to the crowd a little bit about, like, why, from your point of view, why did Atomicos set up that program?
Yeah, of course.
And how are you finding it in terms of how diverse the people that you can invest in via it is?
Yeah, of course. I think what Atomicos is doing essentially now is something that a lot of funds are looking into. So there have been an emergence of scout programs across VCs. In a nutshell, the program is that Atomico picks a couple of community builders, founders, typically in the range of 10 to maybe 15, 20 people. And each one of the angels in the program, they get a mandate to invest some amount of money into startups that they feel are worthy of that. Each investor has a lot of freedom to pick what startups they want to invest in, what stage, as well as the verticals and the markets those startups are in. There are very few limitations from Atomicos side and very reasonable limitations as well. If I am to think about why it makes sense, obviously there is a very logical and maybe strategic argumentation. Obviously for companies like Atomico, which is a late stage VC, it makes a lot of sense to get a new deal flow coming in and kind of see those startups that are growing rapidly at a very early stage. They are also doing it in a very smart way because they're not just picking any random people per se, but they're picking people who are close to the community. So founders, startup community builders, and other people who are pretty much interacting with startups on a day-to-day basis. Another aspect of it is also, of course, the diversity of that group as well. One thing that I was really excited about being a part of the program is just the type of people that I was able to meet. There is diversity in so many different levels, from gender, age, experience, founders, and people coming from high growth unicorns and whatever you feel like. So I think like from that perspective, it actually makes a lot of sense. And of course, on a personal level, for me, why it was very interesting to be a part of it is to try myself in a whole investing thing. So I had a chance to invest in 7 companies, and I've always been very interested in angel investing as a founder myself. So it's a great opportunity to pretty much like dip my toes into that whole thing.
So if you can set up a fund and you can invest in all these underrepresented founders and you can be given money from Atomico to be an angel and find heaps of diverse people, like, is this pipeline problem just all a total myth, Nora?
Don't get me started on the pipeline problem. No, it's not a pipeline problem. It's a network problem at the end. And if we take a look at traditional VCs or the ecosystem as a whole today, we're not doing that much to challenge ourselves to actually ask what kind of perspectives and problems is the closest circle that I'm moving around solving and focusing on. So at the end, I think there are so many myths in 2021 that we have to crush, because we're losing on not only amazing founders and amazing companies, but actual innovation that we need that could actually solve things from different perspectives of founders that have important perspectives to that problem that needs to get fueled into that solution so we can benefit from the innovation.
So if a fund is like, it's all white blokes from Copenhagen, they're the only founders who ever seem to get in touch with us. Gulnaz, what do those funds need to do? Where do they need to be going? Who do they need to be speaking to?
I agree with Nora. I think it's not because there are not, other underrepresented founders. It's just because those funds don't know how to reach them. They are not in their network. And one most logical way to address that is to go to people who interact with those founders. I myself, I'm a female founder and I'm running a B2B SaaS company. And obviously, naturally, I know a lot of other female, immigrant, and other types of underrepresented founders who I talk to because our experiences are quite similar. So it means that by default, I have maybe sometimes better access to those founders. And if I were a VC, I would go and tap onto those networks, connect with those people who naturally interact with those founders. And then, of course, also partner up with other early stage VCs, because they also have their sort of like boots on the ground in that way. And they might meet more of them as well.
And Thea, where else are your kind of tentacles? Is it universities? Like, what are some of the other kind of networks that you tap into to find your founders?
For Unconventional? Well, we are in the fortunate situation that we have a lot of inbound. So, and my amazing partner Nora is all over the place and visible in the right places. So we are in a very good position there, and hasn't been proactive in actually reaching them, but has because the community around UV has been growing so much over the last couple of years. I think if I can just add a comment in terms of the funds, a little bit in terms of what Gulnaz mentioned, I think a lot of the funds underestimate the power of representation. And it's not only representation of the full staff of the funds, but also who are the decision makers. you would be surprised how picky actually the early stage founders are in terms of what kind of capital they want to take in. So if your partner group and ultimately the IC taking the decision on the investments are not diverse or are not representing the founder that are seeking capital, your chances of getting that deck from that company is just smaller. So you are ultimately losing out on this incredible potential. And until those funds actually start to have decision making also being diverse, it's going to be difficult because the competition is just getting harder and harder.
Yeah, Gulnaz, are you kind of seeing that in your network? I've had conversations with people who've said, I've been asking people about like the rise of operator angels on cap tables. That seems to be a thing. And I was like, why is this? And an investor I was speaking to earlier said she thinks it's because it's like clean money. You know exactly who that person is and what they stand for. It's not a sort of mysterious seed fund and you don't know who their investors are. And do you think, is there a kind of movement where founders really are saying, excuse me, you are a 10-person all-white male partnership. What's going on? I don't want your money. Like, is that actually happening?
I think yes and no. I definitely see a movement towards going after more like operational investors. Yeah. So, and that's the trend that I love. I personally raised, for my company, Easysize, I raised several rounds of investments from investors who are actual founders or people who have built companies in the industries that are important for me. I do feel that they add so much value on top of it. But at the same time, as an underrepresented founder, for example, as a female or immigrant founder, we know that the allocation of capital is not the same. So sometimes even if you want to say no to those all 10 white men sort of partnership funds, you just simply don't have other options because at the end of the day, you as a founder, you need to ensure that there is money in the bank for you to run the company. So I do see that now a lot of founders who are in the position to choose, they are becoming more demanding from their from the investors. And I love that as well because you want to make sure that whoever you bring on board, you are on the same page with them.
Yeah. And Thea and Nora, how do you kind of leverage the fact that your investors are like this kind of diverse pool, a lot of women, like how does that kind of play out actually in how the fund runs?
Well, I think that's the exciting part because it really demonstrates what kind of catalytic support they're giving and offering because they are having so much different expertise and experience and insights. We know that each time we're creating these meetings between them or if our portfolio companies are having some issues, they are going to get the best possible solutions because it comes from so many different sources. So they have much more insights with them into that. But I would just to add to, what's the secret sauce kind of thing. And it's actually very simple. It's not rocket science. We need to focus on culture add and not culture fit. That's the only thing.
And for other funds that want to do the same thing, that want to have kind of smaller ticket LPs, open it up. So LPs, the limited partners, the people who invest in VC funds. Like at the moment in Europe, it's quite hard, isn't it?
Very difficult.
You have to be, I know in the UK, you have to be like a high net worth investor, which means you have to have a lot of money in your bank account in order to invest in a VC fund. And a VC doesn't want to take 100 checks from me type people. So what needs to happen or what is happening to kind of open up who invests in VC funds?
Yeah, I think on a regulatory level, there needs to be a shift in Europe that we need to speed up simply how we can structure vehicles that can be inclusive. Today, the investor protection that's set up in the EU to protect private individuals to invest in high risk, like venture funds, is actually eliminating the opportunity for these investors to diversify. So you're allowed to invest in a single startup, but you're not allowed to actually diversify your investment directly. And so in that sense, that investor protection, to some extent, it actually contradicting itself. So on that regulatory level, we need to have a change. And there are things happening in the US, so hopefully the regulators will pick up on that in EU. It is way more difficult to set up micro funds in Europe today. You have AngelList, you have Carta, you have some great players over in the US that has created scalable solutions that can actually get smaller funds up and running. Today, there isn't solutions like that in Europe at all, or not even in the UK, actually. So I think that needs to change. And then needs to be more education on all levels of society, also towards those who actually want to invest. How do you do it? What are the opportunities? Because what we're seeing now with those high growth opportunities, they're not accessible unless you're already rich. And in that sense, it's extremely exclusive for growth for all.
So that's like a not so good part of the ecosystem right now. But Nora, what are some things you're seeing other kind of emerging fund managers do? You know, what are some of the kind of innovations on VC that are out there that kind of give you a bit of hope that maybe things are going to change eventually?
Well, I mean, I know it's going to change because we're not the only ones in this space. There's so many more. And the question is, how fast can we move from this is a problem to this is an opportunity? So we see a lot of different kind of, micro VCs, if we might say, that are looking into creative ways of creating SPVs, raising capital just for that single company, and finding ways of creating basically the track record. Because at the end of the day, to be able to raise a fund, whatever strategy that might be, you have to either, like Thea mentioned, have a lot of capital on your own, or have that network to capital, or have that track record of investments. And I think there are many things that are happening, but my hope that it's the new players along with the current players that is going to join forces.
Gulnaz, as a founder and as an angel, what about you? What are you seeing that kind of gives you hope that this industry is going to open up in a good way?
A lot is actually happening. And I would say that anecdotally, so I've been fundraising this summer, and last time I raised money, it was probably around 2 years ago, so before the pandemic. And even in those 2 years, I already could see a lot of positive changes in the investment landscape in Europe. First of all, there are more emerging funds that are very focused on a particular industry. There are more diverse funds as well. So I see more women, more immigrants in decision-making powers as well. So not just adding in junior positions, but actually people who decide where the investments are going. So I think from that perspective, there are a lot of really great things happening. And then most importantly for me as a founder, what I see is there are more founders today that are much bolder in their decisions. So they're not just taking whatever comes their way, but they're actually the ones who are dictating the rules for investors. They're the ones who are choosing. And for that, no matter whether you are a white guy building a company or if you're a woman building a company, I would say that if you can prioritize funds that have diversity as one of the core focuses, it's definitely going to be something that will pay off big times. So I think from that perspective, there's a lot of work to be done, but there are also a lot of really great things happening in the industry as well.
Yeah. Remember to use Slido if you have any questions. It's sli.do, and I have them on my phone. So I've got one from Anonymous, which is, how many of you... Gulnaz, we know that you are a founder, but Thea and Nora, were either of you founders before?
Yes, so I'm an EdTech founder, and I met Thea as a founder. And the interesting part is I fundraised for my company for 6 months as a pregnant immigrant background, pregnant with my third, I might add. So it was very interesting what type of questions I got. And I think around meeting number 44, and I have to add, I had access, warm introductions. I worked with everyone, so I thought that it's going to go quite quickly. But I had to go to the US to find my way back to the Nordics because I found my first backers in the US, and they were, specifically my first one was an LP. First LP to Thea, and she introduced us. So I always laughed that I had to go all the way back to the US to find my way back to the Nordics.
And when you were on the other side as a founder, what were some of the most frustrating, I guess, like barriers or pushback or like the hurdles that you felt were there, and maybe more so for you with your particular background than someone else?
It was the way I never got the opportunity to take a deep dive in my business model. The many questions were so focused on not only my background as an immigrant and non-technical founder, which I understand, but I worked in the tech space for 13 years with some of the biggest companies in the world, being responsible for the strategies. So for me, they never asked me about, not even the strategies that I was involved in, like what was the results. And I think one of the typical questions that I got time after time was that obviously with the big belly coming into meetings and not making any fuss about it was that, okay, so what's your 1-year plan? And I understood what they meant. And I said, well, I have an amazing team. This is the plan, but I need capital to maintain because if I'm leaving, then I want to make sure that, there's only that much equity left for me to, share. And then they were like, yeah, but, it's really hard. Have you thought about taking a break and then starting again? So it kind of flipped from asking me questions to giving me advice on how to do it. Like I'm the first person ever to have a child and build a company.
Gulnaz, what about you from when you've been out raising money? What are some of the things you feel are kind of ways that stuff is still happening, maybe partly because it's like always been done that way? Like I think like the whole pitching process kind of like boggles my mind. You saying that they weren't even getting into the business model like this, events like this where you have people on stage for like 2 minutes saying something really fast. I'm just like, how is this a good way to really evaluate that founder or this company? Like, what are your particular frustrations?
I think in a lot of cases, it's a little bit more subtle. At least it has been more subtle for me because it always felt that as a female founder, I was asked questions for almost the same, the next stage. So at the pre-seed level, I will get asked questions about the seed stage, right? So at pre-product stage, it will be something around like, but where are your clients? And once you have the first clients, but when are you going to reach this level of the revenue and so on? So it was almost like you can never win that game because the questions you are asked are always harsher and a little bit more about, where you should be probably in 6 months or 12 months and so on. So I think that has been always the biggest frustration for me because I feel as a female founder, you always need to be more prepared and in a way also be prepared to raise less than you want. I also felt that in a lot of cases, talking to other founders as well, is that in a lot of cases we see female founders and in general underrepresented founders raising less money. It takes longer for you to raise and you are asked more metrics to prove your case. And that's just how it is. That's as soon as I realized that's kind of how I started shaping my investment strategy in a sense.
So what is your investment strategy and how do you assess or like look at founders differently having been on, the other side yourself?
I think first of all, it's just understanding that each stage has its own appropriate questions, right? If I'm talking to a pre-seed founder, I'm not going to ask them about their MRR. I'm going to ask about their outlook on the market and why they think they have the best team and how they're looking at the product and all of that, right? So even that small change already will produce a lot of great results because, why are you assessing something that is not there yet?
Yeah. Nora, what about you?
How I'm utilizing my experience. Well, here's the thing. I think one thing that is important, and that's what we always talk about, it being data-driven. There's one thing about my own experience, but I try to stray away from that. But what that does and helps me with is that I have the ability, and we have the ability to assess founders differently, that we realize that we look at how much they've done without resources. And that tells us the story that the capital that they're getting is just a catalytic effect. And that's the strength that we see because, the brilliance of these founders that, without capital, without resources, without network, are building and continuously building these amazing smart solutions, then it's a no-brainer for us to back them. And I think that's part of the evaluation that I can bring with me that we really see from a macro and micro perspective, evaluating founders at an early stage.
And Thea, what about the investors in VC funds? How would you like to see them evaluating emerging fund managers differently?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it now because ultimately we're doing the same things as Nora and Gulnaz says as founders. We're doing the same thing as a fund. We're constantly pitching our coming fund to prospect LPs. And we see the same pattern again that, particularly as an emerging manager, they do prefer to see, 20 years of experience, a track record of hundreds of investment exits, sitting on boards that have been operating for some time. And and with the type of fund that we are creating, we're actually moving away from the status quo. So you can't have the both. And that is the struggle that we, particularly when we talk to very traditional investors, that they tend to have this mold that we need to fit, and a fund that want to do things differently will never fit into that mold. But at the same time, the capital has its requirements. The capital usually have a very strict mandate on stage, experience of the founders, experience of not only the founders of the team, but what kind of investors are already backed, and we see a lot of investors sitting on the fence and just want to see some extra of either traction from other investors or commitments from other investors to actually take that leap of faith. So we know that we're up against some big challenges, being underrepresented and being new managers. But at the same time, we're providing a new solution to something that theoretically a lot of the investors are accepting that is the way of funding going forward.
Yeah. Is it changing though? I feel like, with like Black Lives Matter and COVID, and like there's been some big like global things that I feel, and on climate change, stuff feels.
We really felt a change last spring. Corona hit, Black Lives Matters hit. And particularly from the US. So things are really moving fast in the US. The question is, when does that translate into change into Europe? And I think what we're seeing as more and more capital is pouring into European startups from the US, investors are waking up. They need to have a clear value proposition to the founders, because otherwise, the processes are so fast on the American funds. So the same sort of trend we will see over in funds like ours that have a different approach, both in terms of impact at the core, but also impact in terms of funding diverse founders. So our discussions is mainly with US funds at the moment, because they are their way. But we need to create that FOMO, and it's coming.
Okay, I think that's a good. I can see we're being ready to be chucked off, but that's a good note to end on. You're going to lead the way. Everyone else will, in classic VC style, get FOMO, and then they'll all follow.
And then they'll follow.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.